Today, we're getting an insane behind-the-scenes tour of the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. My brother and his girlfriend came to visit, so I had one mission: give them the ultimate plant lover experience. But we're not just walking around like regular visitors. David, the greenhouse manager, is giving us a secret access to parts of the greenhouse most people never get to see. Stick around because this is going to be epic. But first, we're checking out the reptiles. Everyone in my group is obsessed with building tanks. I do it for my plants and isopods, but the rest of the crew, they're all about the reptiles. And the tanks at ABG, they're on a whole other level. They actually designed them using plants that are native to each reptile's habitat, like the Anthurium Rulandii chilling in the Panama tank with the evergreen toads. That means these animals are living in setups that are just like their natural habitat. How cool is that? Then we found something crazy: the reptile food. These guys actually breed their own flightless fruit flies to feed them. Say that 10 times fast, I dare you. After that, we unlocked a secret area, the back potting zone, where the team pots about 40 plants every single day. I totally forgot to film it this time, but lucky for you, I got footage from when Dr. Block visited me and we did this exact tour. Spoiler alert, it looks just as awesome. Now, let's start touring the actual behind-the-scenes greenhouses. My brother said this was his favorite part. Unlike the public areas, it looks more like a shop with each plant in its own pot. Plants that have thick stems and larger plants are labeled with a metal tag, while delicate or smaller plants have plastic tags in the pot with them. In this greenhouse, we have the tropical humid-loving plants. I think he said this greenhouse stays between 80 and 90% humid with misters in the wet wall. As we move into the next greenhouses, the humidity goes down until we are in the desert-loving area. One thing I love about the employee greenhouses is the tables move so you won't knock anything over as you walk by. I wish I had them in my plant room. Isn't this such a unique color on this Anthurium inflow? Every time I'm here, it draws me in, and I have to stop and appreciate the color. If only I knew that that flower would change the way this tour was going to go. The whole drive over, my brother, his girlfriend, and I talked about all the things the camera phone can do now. My brother mentioned he never takes photos and doesn't know what his phone can do. Well, because of that small flower, he decided to try to learn his camera, and boy, did he. I've been a diehard iPhone girly since like the 4, but whatever Android he has is way better than my iPhone 16 Pro Max at taking photos of imperceptible things. Like, look at the hairs on this fern frond. And this is what our tour consisted of: taking photos of the smallest things we could find, smelling all the different smells plants make, and finding the weirdos like this Nepenthes and this ghost orchid, which looks like a pile of roots. Before we move to the next greenhouse, I wanted to show you this Anthurium, named after David, the greenhouse manager, that grows flowers on the inflorescence. I'm going to make a whole video about it, and I'll link it when it's out. This is David, me, and his namesake Anthurium. This is the next greenhouse, which I believe has a humidity range of 60 to 70%. Do you see those tags on the orchids? ABG has started using beneficial bugs for many plant pests like spider mites, aphids, and thrips. Like many collectors, ABG has also noticed pests have started to become resistant to the chemical pesticides we use. This is due to the US overusing pesticides and treating plants that don't have pests. Last year, I experienced pest-resistant spider mites. It took me nearly an entire year to eradicate them, and I spent nearly $1,000 on different types of pesticides and beneficials in the process. Moral of the story: don't spray pesticides unless you actually have pests. My bad, I didn't mean to go off on a rant, but it was needed. This next clip I was hoping David could explain, but there was too much noise in the background, so I'm going to repeat exactly what he said. This is an extremely hard to root Arcaria juniper conifer branch that rooted out of this pot, along with the Drinaria corsicolia fern, which is kind of taken over. David doesn't think that they have this conifer in the collection anymore, so he's glad that it happened to jump out somewhere. I'm really loving this conifer fern combination. It's so cool and unique, and I would never have thought to do it. While we're on the subject of conifers, let's hop back to Greenhouse 1 to look at some other unique conifers they're trying to root right now. When I think of conifers, I think of Georgia's native loblolly pines and Christmas trees, not whatever this is. At this size, it looks like a little dying bush, but this larger one is absolutely beautiful. It sits right outside the public greenhouse so you can see it up close for yourself. But the conifer that originally caught my eye was the silvery white undersides of this conifer. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name, but I've added it to the corner. When I think of conifers, I think of North America and also really cold countries. What I don't think of is China, but that's where this one is from. Sounds like I need to be doing some more traveling. Could you imagine how beautiful it would be if we started using this as a Christmas tree? We finally made it to the driest greenhouse in the back. This is, of course, the desert area. I don't grow many cacti and succulents, but boy do they fascinate me. I'm constantly blown away by the uniqueness and detail you can find in desert-loving plants, like this euphorbia, which looks like it has a Labicia leaf stuck on a pile of sticks. Does it not? Then you have whatever this is. If you told me this plant came from Jupiter, I'd believe you, as its appearance is just out of this world. Atlanta Botanical Gardens also houses their conifers in this greenhouse because they have so many that they've run out of space to put them in. Look at those tiny little pine cones, aren't they cute? If you think we're almost through because we've reached the last greenhouse, you're wrong. We still have the backside of all the greenhouses we just went through, and the backside is probably my favorite side. It's where they house a lot of their begonias and hanging plants that I find the most interesting. This also happens to be the spot my brother found most interesting, as he realized he isn't limited to growing plants on the floor of his terrarium and growing them up the sides or making soil pockets to add them in. Instead, he can grow them like the plants on these boards. David was kind enough to teach us how ABG attaches ferns to boards without wrapping the plant in string or wire to hold it on. It's a bit of a process, but it seems easier than trying to tie it up. First, you take a piece of wood, a board, or an orchid basket and make sure it can hang on horizontally. Then you remove the excess soil from the plant, put it on a board or in the basket. As it grows, you will slowly start to lean one side of the plant to make sure it's anchoring itself on. See how this one is starting to lean? Eventually, you'll be able to have it completely vertical to hang it on the wall, just like this. It's that simple. Speaking of vertical plants, did you know that ant plants and ant ferns can also be added to a board? This particular one is my favorite because of the color and the fronds. The fronds look like a standard fern frond from far away, but as you get closer, they have little circles on the edges, and the color is just something you have to see in person. In person, the green rhizome or base almost looks turquoise or sky blue, and what appears as purple here has a variety of pinks, purples, and indigos. It's just a stellar plant. My second favorite fern is probably this one. The fronds are pretty basic, but the rhizome makes up for it. If you have triphobia, you may not want to look at the rhizomes on this one. If not, check out the long, skinny rhizomes and just how detailed they are. The video doesn't really compare to how cool it is in person. I'd love to take a magnifying glass or microscope to this one. Both the ant ferns and ant plants have a symbiotic relationship with ants, hence the name. If you were to cut them open, as you see here, the plants have little tunnels for the ants to live in. Ants protect the plants from predators like a hungry caterpillar and also bring nutrients to the plant, as there isn't much nutrients up high on the side of a tree, which is where you would find them in the wild. Other common plants that can be placed on boards are orchids, tillandsia, ferns, dischidia, hoya, and bromeliads. Of course, you can mount many other epiphytes, but you want to consider how quickly they're going to grow. Around this time is when we started really looking for flowers to smell. We didn't start with this next clip, but I figured it was a good way to start this chapter off. I went first, we didn't video that, so here's Gator.
It's about the film, but it's not very fragrant at the moment. It might have a...
Alright.
If you couldn't tell by the face she made, this is what's so lovingly called as a corpse flower, or one of them at least. As you heard David say, it wasn't very fragrant at the moment, but we all smelled it except my brother. It smelled like a wet, week-old, dead sewer rat. Thankfully, we had many sweeter smelling flowers to inhale after that one to clear our noses of that putrid smell. The next photo and clip are from my last visit. The moss and fern growing on a terracotta pot is just beautiful and is a great reminder how resilient plants are. This plant looks like an Amorphophallus, but it's not. I don't remember the name of this plant, but it is closely related to the ZZ plant and the giraffe knee plant. Both plants fall under this tribe on the screen. Our last plant in the back greenhouse is this captivating caladium. I thought it may be the same species that Silverchrome has, but this one gets white spots and the one at Silverchrome does not. I'm not going to make a fool of myself and mispronounce the name, so I've added it to the screen. And this is the one in Bill's collection at Silverchrome. Now it's time to tour the public spaces. This is the tropical Rotunda greenhouse. This greenhouse is so tall that when plants climb too high or the canopy starts to block too much light to the floor, ABG has to hire professional tree trimmers to come clean it up. It's over 60 foot tall and the aerial roots hanging down from the top are my favorite part of this greenhouse. While some of the other greenhouses focus on certain regions, this greenhouse contains plants from tropical regions all over the world. A few of the plants you'll find in here are bromeliads, cycads, melastomas, philodendron, tropical conifers, orchids, and many tropical palms. In fact, they house 170 of the 2,600 palm species in the greenhouses. You'll also find some edible plants in here like the vanilla orchid, neotropical blueberries, banana, and the cacao tree, which makes chocolate. As you can see, ABG really jams this greenhouse full of plants. You could probably spend all day in this greenhouse and miss so many things. It's the only greenhouse I've been to that truly looks like you're walking through a jungle. If you're like me and love epiphytic plants, you'll not find another garden like Atlanta Botanical Garden's Tropical Rotunda. You have to have your head on a swivel to see everything as they plant epiphytes high up in the trees and tiny crawlers on the floor. They really try to make you feel like you're walking through the rainforest with all your senses. While walking through this greenhouse, listen closely. You might be lucky enough to hear the calls of the phantasmal poison frogs or the coqui frogs. And when you reach this waterfall, take a moment to peer into the pond below. You might just catch a glimpse of the alligator snapping turtle. This conservatory is a total of 1,600 square feet. If you think watering your plants is exhausting, imagine having to water all of these. Yes, they hand water everything you've seen so far, along with the next 3 houses we'll check out in this video. If you notice the misters, those are only used for humidity. I asked David why they didn't switch to a sprinkler system, and he said watering individually helps them give each plant what it needs and check on it in the process.
This is probably pound for pound one of the more rare plants in this whole house.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Where it comes from in Costa Rica? Pretty sure.
Looks like it, yeah.
And so if you go on CITES or if you look for endangered, this in its native environment, this is about as rare as it gets.
Yeah.
And yet it looks like a Gormansia. It's not. It even smells at night. You've been here at night to smell it?
Yeah. It does smell okay.
But most people never
It's a
see
tricky
these.
thing. It's happy on the edge of the box right there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think you try to put it in the middle of a bed and it cracks.
I have it in one bucket, but the main lead started to die back. So only about 8 months ago, I took it out of the pot, cleaned a hole, and saw where secondary growth was. And then I tried to cut away this.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever try to cut this, you better bring your lopper.
I found that clip of David and Dr. Block discussing that Ulsa pulchra, and I thought you may enjoy it before moving to the next house. Right outside the desert house is a special collector's exhibit. It's constantly changing, but currently features plants that have a symbiotic relationship with animals, like one of my favorite plants, the Strophocactus wittii. Do you see it peeking out? Moving on to the desert house. I actually only took 2 videos in here from this trip, but found a few old videos I could add in. Despite what you may think, the desert house doesn't have a single cactus in it. What you're looking at is not a cactus, but a euphorbia. So if there are no cacti, what's in it? You'll find hawthorn, sansevieria, desert rose, Welwitschia, and of course, aloe, to name a few. Did you know there are over 500 species of aloe and only 1 species in the genus Welwitschia? Welwitschia mirabilis is probably my favorite plant in the desert house. It's believed that these plants date back around 200 million years, thriving alongside dinosaurs. The oldest known living specimen is believed to have been around when Jesus was alive. Like the ancient cycad and palms, each plant is either male or female. Unlike other plants, it only produces 2 leaves its entire life, and those 2 leaves continuously grow. Because the average rainfall in the Namib Desert is 10 to 40 milliliters per year, it has an extremely long taproot to reach moisture underground. If the taproot is damaged even a tiny bit, this plant is a goner. This is one of the few plants that if you get your hands on it, you won't want to replicate its natural habitat to grow it. It wants cacti and succulent soil, but not their watering schedule. I could literally go on and on about this one, but let's move on. The desert house contains plants mostly endemic to Madagascar and South Africa's arid regions. Because these regions can vary, the desert house is sectioned off into segments and each area has its own special watering schedule and soil mix. The desert house originally opened in 1989 and is the perfect environment for the critically endangered radiated tortoise, which is housed to the right of the front entrance. Wow, I did not realize what a huge contrast the desert house is to this next house. This is the high elevation house, and it houses plants that have a native range of 4,000 to 12,000 feet above sea level. Even though the tropical Rotunda appears to have more plants as it's more densely planted, there's actually more diversity in this greenhouse per square foot than in that one. The reasoning is because there's so many insanely tiny plants planted in the high elevation house. Unfortunately, the backside was closed as they are building a new bridge, so most of the videos of the backside are from previous trips here to give you an idea of what's inside. Like the desert house, this greenhouse is sectioned into 3 regions. This section right here is the tabletop mountain region, or Tapu region of Venezuela, where you can find the carnivorous plant Helianthera and also one of the Anthurium Rulandii, which we discussed earlier. In the next few weeks, if you happen to make it to Atlanta, you should stop in to see the unusual flower on this Anthurium in person. This weird looking plant reminds me of string beans with a flower glued onto it, but clearly that's not what it is. This is the most unusual orchid I've ever seen, and it's called Pleurophthalus dilemma. I was so intrigued by it. Orchids are the only plants in the greenhouse that Atlanta Botanical Gardens deliberately and routinely pollinates. Occasionally, they will pollinate other plants, but only on special occasions or when the opportunity arises, like when the Amorphophallus titanum bloomed. If you're looking for a place to cool off, the high elevation house is the place to be. This greenhouse stays below 75 degrees year-round. This area is the Andes mountain region, and this weird-looking plant with the odd textured stems is actually a fern called Elaphoglossum decorotum. This fern has smooth fronds instead of the lacy or textured fronds we usually picture when we think of ferns. And if you look to the right of this water, you'll see a rather large Anthurium. This Anthurium, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated Anthurium, called Anthurium recavum. It's got a crazy dark, somewhat metallic looking leaf and kind of reminds me if Veitchii and Dresslerii had a baby. It's got the feel, length, and shine of an immature Veitchii, but with the dark, beautiful colors of the Dresslerii. We didn't get up close to the next plant, but my brother was able to take the last 2 close-ups with his fancy camera phone. This beautiful black inflow is from an Anthurium cabarensis, and it seems to be in bloom every time I come. It's one of the truest blacks I've seen in nature. Before we leave the high elevation house, check out the purple on this orchid I thought was a Tradescantia at first, and the humongous Hesperia. This thing was so big it towered over me. I don't think I've ever seen one so robust. Have you? I was hoping to see more of these wasp-looking orchids while here, but one of their orchid greenhouses is closed as they're setting up for Orchid Days, which starts this weekend. These wasp orchids are under the genus Gongora. The first time I had ever laid eyes on one is at Atlanta Botanical Gardens, and I've been absolutely obsessed with them ever since. Anytime I meet an orchid collector, I show them that first clip because I'm that obsessed. One fact I've learned about them is there's only one single genus of bee that pollinates these orchids, and that bee isn't even looking for pollen from the flower, but looking for the fragrance to coat itself in order to attract females. While collecting the scent, the male bee unintentionally collects the pollen too. The bee will collect different fragrances from different flowers to make his own unique perfume. Fun fact, one species of bee is named after everyone's favorite Big Bang Theory character, Sheldon, inspired by his iconic catchphrase, Bazinga! Like many flowers, orchids have a wide variety of smells. Some smell like candy, others smell more floral, and a few smell bad. The flower doesn't put off a smell just for funsies. These smells are there to attract different types of things to pollinate it. For example, the sweet fragrance of Gongora attracts the euglossan bees, while Bobophyllum emits a rotting odor to attract flies. I won't go too in depth about this as I plan on making a video about this specifically later on. This video of the Welwitschia and Dr. Block is from around 2 years ago, and then this next video is from this week. See how much bigger it's grown? It was already gigantic, but now look at it. Welwitschia are one of the few climbing anthuriums, so give your queen a pole. If you do a 180 in front of the Welwitschia, you'll find this anthurium endemic to Mexico. Meet the sweetheart of Anthurium, Anthurium clarinervum. When in the orchid greenhouse, don't forget to check the ground coverings or you may miss all the beautiful mosses, Epischia, and other tiny plants like this begonia. I'm not going to try to say the name, here's the tag. I'm not a Monstera person, but this Monstera deliciosa doesn't look normal to me. It's not very long, but the leaves are massive and mature. Even the smallest leaves have fenstration. Am I tripping? Does it look normal to you? As you can see, the orchid house has many other plants than just orchids, so if you're not an orchid person, check it out anyways. But if you are an orchid lover, the Atlanta Botanical Garden boasts a diverse collection of over 2,000 orchid species spanning more than 200 genera, and they're in almost every greenhouse. Their orchid collection is one of the largest public collections in the entire world. So like I said, if you're an orchid fan, this garden is a must-see. The Orchid Atrium houses orchids and other plants that live in elevations from 6,000 feet to sea level. The indoor greenhouses are rarely discussed online, but in my opinion, are just as amazing as the outdoor grounds. Let's go check those out now. Right outside the greenhouse is a beautiful conifer garden. One appears to be variegated. Here's the greenhouse from across the yard. I love seeing this view with the city in the background. Another thing I really love about ABG is they are always adding art installations and have exhibits going on like this Alice in Wonderland setup or the trolls they had last spring. The Atlanta Botanical Garden spans 30 acres and you'll find plants in every corner of it. We didn't cover most of the outdoor area because my brother got hungry and I wouldn't let him eat anything in the edible garden. I tried to get him to get a snack from the restaurant, but he didn't want to ruin his appetite. So we ended up leaving and heading over to the Varsity. Every time we pass the Varsity to go to a Falcons game, my dad mentions how good it was. The last time he ate here, he was in college and went to the Georgia Tech Clemson game. Walking in, we were surprised at how big it was. It looked like an old burger joint. It was an old burger joint. The lines were extremely long, but I think it was totally worth it. I got 2 chili dogs, fries, and an orange shake that tasted like an orange creamsicle. All that was only $20. Clark got a double burger with fries, and Gator just wanted fries. We sat in the back so we could see the city and unexpectedly got dinner and a show when someone tried to run from the police and got tackled. It was definitely an experience, and I'd definitely go back again. Before heading home, we stopped at PetSmart to grab a few things, and my brother convinced me to get this pickle toy because his cats love it. I was skeptical at first, but then Lucy started playing with it, and Lucy never plays with toys. For $3, absolutely worth it. Everyone always calls me the cat whisperer, but I think I may have to hand that title to my brother. And that's a wrap for our Saturday. Have you been to the Atlanta Botanical Gardens? If not, what do you think your favorite part's gonna be? For this trip, I think it was the cool Anthurium for me. By the way, YouTube thinks you'll like this video next.